this week the seniors are back and I couldn't be happier. I've got footage to share with you on some work that they did this past Monday, as well as a little bit of footage from one of the seniors working at their dealership. Next week I'm going to share with you some of the information about the 48, bring you up to speed on where we were and where we're headed. Thanks for tuning in.
First, the drive shaft comes out.
In order to remove the transmission, we need to remove the torque converter bolts.
With the trans jack supporting the transmission, we remove the trans cross member. Now we can lower it to get to all the bell housing bolts. A 3-foot extension allows for easy removal of the bolts. A little force to get it off the alignment dowels, and it comes right out.
The hood is removed to make it easier to remove the engine. We're removing the ECM and wiring harness.
With the transmission out of the way, we're ready to remove the engine. I'm leveling the filler with 40 grit. With the second coat of filler, I'm now sanding it with 80 grit. With the filler now sanded and feathered with 80 grit, it is now time to spray the primer.
Most of the small parts for the Harley are back on. We've got a few more things to go to finish it off. I got a new battery in it. Let's see if this thing will fire up. Choked. That's a good sound. Looks like we need to adjust the idle on it, but otherwise it does run. So we're just about ready to finish this thing up and get it out of here.
I'm making the gauge buckets out of PVC. Since I'm not using this trip meter, I'm removing it from the speedometer assembly. We're cutting this Lexan with a hole saw to use as our gauge lenses. We're cutting a second one because we have two gauges. Since the drill press base is made of steel, we put a piece of cardboard down to protect our Lexan from scratches. I'm cutting a recess in the PVC for the gauge to sit. Now you can see why we needed to make the recess into the PVC, because of the offset in the gauge, and now it fits perfectly.
With the seniors back in the lab, they're going to get busy working on the 48 Chevy engine. This particular inline 6 only has 4 mains for the crankshaft. With the pistons out of it and one of the mains off, I still can't rotate this crank. Now it did run before and we can turn it with a big breaker bar, but whoever had done this engine, and it's clear that someone had been in here recently, or at least before we got it, that they didn't set the crankshaft up correctly. So the clearances are way too tight. That's going to cause us to starve for oil. So we're going to get every one of these correct before we start setting up the pistons to get them put back in. And we're going to have this thing running a lot better than it did.
We're using an inside micrometer to measure the cylinders of the 48 Chevy. Now we're measuring our pistons to calculate our piston to cylinder wall clearance.
I'm measuring ring end gap on the original rings. We are tapping out the holes in the balancer for the puller bolts.
We're doing this because there's years of debris in there and we want to make sure the bolts go in far enough to get a clean pull on the balancer.
Now we can remove the timing cover.
We're removing the camshaft so we can replace the camshaft bearings.
I'm removing the crank gear so we can take off the timing cover backing plate. The crankshaft seems to have too much resistance, so we're pulling the main caps to check clearance.
In order to check the main bearing clearance, we're using plastic gauge like we did with the tractor engine. So we've got everything cleaned up with our shims that were originally on it. Now we're going to put the cap on it, torque it down. Then once we get it torqued down and in place, we'll release it, pull it back off, and then we'll see how much oil clearance we have in the main. Alright, we'll measure the plastic gauge and see how much clearance we have.
There is less than 1/1000 inch on this journal, so it will need to be shimmed. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll have that 48 Chevy crank adjusted properly and spinning freely, and to that end we'll show you how to make your own shims if you ever need to do that. And hopefully we'll have that Harley finished, running, and out the door. See you next week.